Welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going to take a close look at Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy,
Yeah.
or DMD as it's often called. We've got some really interesting research papers and medical reviews to go through today so we can, unpack this complex condition. We'll break down the science behind it, talk about who it affects, and really get into how DMD develops. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a solid understanding of DMD and what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely. It's a condition that can really have a big impact on people's lives. So understanding it is super important.
Couldn't agree more. So to kick things off, maybe we can just start with the basics. What exactly is DMD?
Well, DMD is a genetic disorder and it causes muscle weakness and wasting. It gets worse over time. Imagine a child who, loves to run and play. But as they get older, they start having trouble keeping up with their friends, like struggling to climb stairs, maybe even just getting up from the floor. These kind of difficulties, they usually show up around 2 or 3 years old. And those are often some of the first signs of DMD.
Wow, yeah, that really brings it to life. The challenges that kids with DMD face, it's tough to hear. So what exactly causes these muscles to, degenerate like that over time?
It all comes down to, well, a gene called the DMD gene, actually. Mutations in this gene, they mess up the production of a protein called dystrophin. You can think of dystrophin like the scaffolding that holds muscle cells together supports them, and without it, the cell membrane gets weak and easily damaged, which then leads to a bunch of other problems.
So it's like a building without a strong foundation, and it's just gonna, crumble.
Exactly. And the consequences are, well, they can be pretty severe. The damaged muscle cells, they get inflamed and they can't repair themselves properly. And over time, that healthy muscle tissue is replaced with fat and scar tissue. And ultimately, that's what causes the muscle weakness and wasting that are the hallmarks of DMD.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of a domino effect then. You mentioned that DMD is a genetic disorder. So who does this condition usually affect?
DMD mainly affects males because, well, the gene responsible for making dystrophin is on the X chromosome. And as you know, males have one X chromosome, so if they inherit that mutated gene, they'll develop DMD.
Right, that makes sense. What about females, though? Can they inherit DMD?
It's really, really rare for females to have DMD because they have two X chromosomes. So even if one has the mutation, the other one can usually step in and make enough dystrophin
Okay.
to, keep the muscles healthy. But females who inherit one mutated X, they become carriers.
So they could potentially pass it on to their children, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. And how common is DMD? Like, how many people are affected by this?
DMD affects roughly, let me see, between 10.71 and 27.78 males per 100,000. So it's considered a rare condition.
Wow, that is rare. But even though it's rare, the impact is obviously huge for those affected.
Yeah.
So we know DMD is genetic, but are there any like lifestyle factors or environmental things that can trigger it?
That's a good question. And the mutations in the DMD gene that cause DMD are inherited. They're not triggered by anything in the environment or someone's lifestyle. It really boils down to the genes you inherit from your parents. However, there is some research suggesting that other genes, called genetic modifiers, might influence how severe DMD is or how quickly it progresses.
Genetic modifiers. That sounds interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about those?
Well, imagine this. You have the DMD gene mutation, right? That sets the stage. But these genetic modifiers, they can act like a dimmer switch, either turning up or down the severity of the disease.
So even though it's the same DMD gene mutation, the disease could look different in different people depending on these modifiers.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Understanding these modifiers is a big focus in DMD research right now. It could be really important for developing more personalized treatments in the future.
That's fascinating. So we've got these genetic modifiers adding another layer of complexity to DMD. We know it primarily affects boys because of the way it's inherited. But besides gender, are there any other factors that might make someone more likely to develop DMD or affect how severe it is?
Well, as we just talked about, those genetic modifiers play a significant role. We're still figuring out exactly which genes are involved and how they work, but they seem to contribute to the wide range of variations we see in how DMD presents itself.
So it's not as simple as just inheriting the gene mutation. There's a whole lot more to it.
Right. It's like each person with DMD has their own unique version of the condition based on their genetic makeup.
Okay, so we've covered the basics. DMD is caused by mutations in the DMD gene. It mostly affects boys, and it leads to progressive muscle weakness and wasting.
Hmm.
You mentioned earlier that the damage to muscle cells sets off a chain reaction of negative consequences. Can we dig a little deeper into those consequences? what's actually happening at the cellular level.
Absolutely. Let's take a closer look at what happens inside those muscle cells when dystrophin is missing. Okay, so basically when dystrophin's missing, it starts this chain reaction. It weakens the muscle cell membrane, the sarcolemma. You can think of it like a sense that's lost its support beams. It gets all flimsy and it's really prone to damage, especially when the muscle contracts.
Oh, I see. So every time the muscle is used, it's basically like tearing itself apart a little bit more.
Yeah, pretty much. And then that damage makes the cell contents leak out and the muscle fiber gets even weaker. It's like a vicious cycle of damage and weakening.
That sounds really destructive. Yikes.
Hmm.
So what else, what other issues come up from this lack of dystrophin?
Well, another big one is something called functional ischemia, which basically means the muscle isn't getting enough blood flow.
So it's like the muscle's being starved of oxygen and nutrients.
Exactly. You see, dystrophin actually helps regulate nitric oxide, which is a molecule that's really important for controlling blood flow. So without enough dystrophin, that regulation gets messed up. And the muscles don't get the blood supply they need, even when they're working hard.
Okay, so the muscle's already weak and damaged.
Yeah.
A&D, it's not getting the resources it needs to function properly. Are there, other things going on that make this whole situation even worse?
Yeah, unfortunately there are. The lack of dystrophin also causes an increase in free radicals, which are these highly reactive molecules that can cause even more damage to the muscle cells.
Ah, so it's like adding fuel to the fire, essentially.
Exactly. They just wreak havoc on the muscle cells, and that just makes the damage worse, speeds up the whole degeneration process.
It seems like these poor muscles are fighting a losing battle on multiple fronts here. Is there anything else working against them?
Well, there's also the problem of calcium dysregulation. Calcium is important for muscle function, but it needs to be carefully controlled. But in DMD, the lack of dystrophin disrupts that balance, and it leads to too much calcium building up inside the muscle cells.
I guess too much of a good thing can be bad, huh?
Right, exactly. And this calcium overload, it just contributes to even more muscle cell death, which obviously makes the muscle weakness worse.
So we've got the weakened cell membrane, the reduced blood flow, the free radical damage, and now the calcium dysregulation, all contributing to the muscle breaking down. Is there anything else that makes this whole situation even worse?
I hate to say it, but yes. Our bodies are usually pretty good at repairing muscle damage, but DMD actually makes that process less efficient. So without dystrophin, muscle regeneration is really slow, and eventually that leads to the muscle tissue being replaced by fat and scar tissue.
Wow, so it's like a double whammy.
Increased damage and do reduce repair. It's no wonder this condition is so devastating.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. And these processes are happening all the time in the bodies of people with DMD, right?
Yeah, they are, sadly. That's why the muscle wasting just keeps getting worse.
It's amazing how the absence of just one protein can have such a huge ripple effect throughout the body. You mentioned earlier that DMD affects more than just the skeletal muscles, right? Like, it can also impact the heart.
That's right. It can lead to a condition called dilated cardiomyopathy.
And what does that mean for someone with DMD?
Well, in dilated cardiomyopathy, the heart's chambers get bigger, but they also get weaker. So the heart's not as good at pumping blood through the body, which can lead to heart failure and a bunch of other complications.
Oh, wow, that's really serious. What about the brain? Does DMD affect cognitive function too?
It can, actually. DMD can cause cognitive impairment, learning difficulties, and some behavioral issues in about a third of patients.
Wow, so the impact of DMD goes way beyond just muscle weakness. It's a multi-system disorder.
Yeah, it is. And it can have some really serious consequences for the heart and the brain.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, for sure.
This has been a really insightful look into the complexities of DMD. We've covered the genetics, the domino effect of consequences at the cellular level, and the broader impact on the heart and the brain. But before we move on, I wanted to circle back to those genetic modifiers we talked about earlier. They seem to play a really important role in how DMD actually manifests in each individual.
They really do. And that's where a lot of the excitement in DMD research is right now, figuring out how these modifiers work.
So we've been talking about these genetic modifiers and how they can impact, how severe DMD is. It's like everyone with DMD kind of has their own personalized version of the condition. Can you give us some specific examples of these modifiers and how they might be at play?
Yeah, definitely. One example is a gene called SPP1. It's involved in bone formation and immune responses, actually. And research suggests that variations in this gene can influence how bad the muscle damage and fibrosis are in people with DMD.
So some variations of SBP1 might make the muscle damage worse, and others might actually offer some protection.
Exactly, yeah. And there's another interesting example with the LTBP4 gene, which helps regulate the activity of a protein called TGF-beta.
Wait, isn't TGF-beta involved in, like, scar tissue formation?
You got it. 2GF-beta is a key player in fibrosis, which is, the buildup of scar tissue in the muscles. And variations in the LTBP4 gene can affect how much TGF-beta is active, which then, directly impacts the degree of fibrosis in DMD muscles.
So, okay, let's say you have two people with the same DMD gene mutation. One has a variation of LTBP4 that keeps TGF-beta under control, and the other has a variation that, like, lets TGF-beta go crazy.
Yeah.
What would that mean for their experience with DMD?
It could be a huge difference, yeah. The person with the variation that controls TGF-beta might have a slower disease progression, with less severe muscle fibrosis. But the other person, they might experience a much faster decline in muscle function.
Wow, that's incredible. It really shows how personalized DMD can be, even though it all comes back to that same root cause.
Exactly. And that's why research into these genetic modifiers is so exciting, It's opening up possibilities for more targeted and personalized therapies for DMD, tailored to each person's unique genetic profile.
That's amazing. It's like instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, we're moving towards a future where treatment is really tailored to each individual's needs.
Right, exactly. It's like having a toolkit with all sorts of different options. And by understanding these genetic modifiers, we can choose the best tools for each person to help them manage their DMD more effectively.
That's really hopeful. Well, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive into Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We've learned about the genetics behind it, the chain reaction of consequences that lead to muscle wasting, the impact on other systems like the heart and brain, and the fascinating role of those genetic modifiers.
It's a complex condition, that's for sure.
It really is.
But understanding all these complexities is paving the way for new discoveries and hopefully some breakthroughs in treatment.
Absolutely. It's exciting to think about the possibilities. So as we wrap up here, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember from our conversation today?
I think the most important thing to remember is that DMD is incredibly complex. It's not just about one gene mutation. It's about a whole network of genetic and cellular factors. And this complexity means we need more research and more personalized therapies. Therapies that are designed to meet the specific needs of each individual with DMD.
That's a powerful message, I think. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep learning about DMD and stay informed about the latest research. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.